Our next speaker is Jim Carr, who is the Chief Clinical Development Officer of Stealth Biotherapeutics, and he will be speaking on LHON development update.
Hi, again, my name is Jim Carr. I lead the clinical development efforts at Stealth Biotherapeutics, and I'm delighted to be here today to provide a brief update on the progress of our LHON program. Our CEO gave a talk earlier today, so I'll just provide a brief overview of the company. We're a small biotech company based in Boston, just outside of Boston. Our focus is rare mitochondrial diseases associated with aging, as well as neurodegenerative diseases. We are a small company, but we have very diverse efforts really across the world. Dr. Enns actually provided a great overview about this, but when studying rare disease populations, there are many challenges which we have to confront, but so do our physicians, scientists, and in particular patients. There's a small number of patients to choose from so I think everyone's aware of the epidemiology of LHON, so there just aren't that many patients. As a result of that, it's a burden for patients that have to travel across the US, for example. We had one clinical site for this trial in Southern California, so that puts a burden on patients and caregivers to get patients really, if they're living in the eastern part of the US, to get to California, for example. Natural history is typically not well understood. Underdiagnosis is common, and phenotypic diversity within a disorder is, as you know, very common within mitochondrial diseases in general. The solutions are to build relationships with patients and patient advocacy groups, which is obviously why we're here. Patient registries help a lot to understand natural history, provides a mechanism to support the diagnosis, and then regulatory initiatives. So James Valentine gave a very nice overview of patient-focused drug development meetings, which really condition FDA to understand the diseases that we're hoping to get drugs approved for, drugs and devices. Protocols and clinical trial design are also complex in the setting. The challenges are there are a lack of well-defined and validated clinically meaningful endpoints. My background is that I've been doing really cardiovascular drug development for decades. I can do that in my sleep. There's really a blueprint for how to do that. One could argue that in rare diseases, we're kind of like sometimes building the airplane as we're flying it. So we launch it and we continue to optimize as we continue to evolve our programs. Again, there are small populations. We have to harmonize global trials. There's high subject burden, as we talked about. The solutions are increased engagement, collaboration with scientific advisors, clinical experts, understand, develop clinical endpoints specific for the patient population. So sometimes we have to build around endpoints. Explore unique trial designs and sometimes bring the trial to the patient. Now, a brief update about our program in Leber's. So, again, this was talked about previously, but our drug targets the inner mitochondrial membrane and localizes the cardiolipin. We've shown in different disease models that we can essentially fix mitochondria, at least morphologically. It looks like we can help normalize the appearance of mitochondria. We believe going along with that, it leads to an improvement in mitochondrial function. We've demonstrated evidence of efficacy in multiple preclinical models and clinical trials. Now, this is the design of ReSIGHT, the LHON clinical study design. This was a 12-patient trial. There were 3 different randomization schemes. So Elamipretide, 1% drops were delivered BID to both eyes in 4 subjects. 4 of the subjects received active treatment in the right eye, and the other eye got sham or placebo. And then the other group of patients, it was the left eye. So 4 patients got drops in the left eye, while the opposite eye got placebo. The endpoints were safety and a variety of secondary endpoints. We are literally still analyzing the data. This trial just concluded recently, so I don't have data to share with you. I have some impressions about the data which I can share, but we will have, I wish I had as much data it was shared with you with GenSight, and we will have that very shortly. We're not there yet. The study population, again, there were 12 patients In this trial, the diagnosis of LHON was on the basis of clinical and ophthalmologic functional and anatomic test findings, satisfactory documentation of the DNA mutation, specifically 11778. It was confined to just that mutation. Loss of vision in both eyes of at least greater than a year and less than 10 years at time of screening. The investigational product was double masked, as I've talked about. It was Elamipretide topical ophthalmic drops, 1%, delivered BID to the treatment eye. And as I talked about, there were 4 subjects that got drops in both eyes. 4 subjects, left eye, opposite eye, placebo, and again, 4 subjects, right eye, opposite eye, placebo. The vehicle solution was just matching in appearance, but it was a vehicle, a non-active vehicle. The patients, upon completion of the randomized or masked part of the trial, went into the open label extension, and that is still ongoing. These are the demographics, very similar to the demographics you've seen in previous presentations. The age was about 34 years. 10 of the 12 subjects were male. Time since genetically confirmed diagnosis, an average of 3.8 years. All subjects were randomized at least 2 years after the initial diagnosis. The BCVA at baseline is about 15 letters. This is more about some of the baseline characteristics. You can see that obviously very impaired vision at baseline in these subjects. And you can see the year of diagnosis. We didn't start this trial until 2016. So you can see that some of the patients were diagnosed in 2014. So most of these patients had been diagnosed several years prior to being randomized in this trial. As I said, we don't have detailed information about efficacy yet, but I can share with you impressions that we have. Again, we're still collecting and verifying data. I can say that signals of efficacy are apparent. There's preliminary evidence that long duration of dosing with drops will be a requirement. We could even tell by the mass data that it took several months before we could see movement on the endpoints that we were evaluating. There was a very low incidence of treatment emergent adverse events. So as James Valentine talked about earlier, for regulatory decisions, it's really a risk versus benefit. I can say unequivocally that it doesn't appear to be a very risky proposition to put eye drops, at least 1% eye drops in the eye in patients with LHON. In this trial, we're actually capturing videotapes from patients as they go into the open label aspect of the trial. This has been really interesting. What I can say is that already, I know we don't have all of the data yet, but I can tell that the functional vision or some of the benefits that are being described by patients, we probably don't have endpoints that are sensitive enough to capture that. What that may mean is that we need to develop a non-traditional customized endpoint which may capture some of the additional changes in vision that are meaningful to patients. So for example, I can provide an anecdote. There was a patient, and I've watched most of the videotapes. There was a patient that no longer trips over his dog while walking through the house. That's pretty meaningful. There was a subject that really enjoys eating and really appreciates the fact that he can pick out the things in the salad that he doesn't like. We can't capture endpoints like that. Right now we don't have endpoints that can capture that kind of specificity of what is meaningful to patients. So the videotape evidence is actually, again, really helpful for us to know how to develop endpoints that are important for the patients that have LHON. So our next steps, we are, as a company, remain committed to developing a therapy for LHON. We're in this for the long term. As was talked about, this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. We're aware of that, and we're up for the marathon. We've extended the duration of the open label extension on the basis of, again, our initial impression of the data. We're planning additional trials in both the US and China. We are considering evolving this to systemic dosing, which may address, among other things, non-ocular manifestations. We also know from animal studies we do get more drug to the back of the eye if we give the drug systemically. We know that we can get drug to the back of the eye with eye drops. We know we can get more to the back of the eye with a systemic delivery. And on the basis, we're hoping that the data are compelling enough to be actionable as they are. Again, we're still in the process of analyzing the data, but we're hoping the data are compelling enough to be actionable. At the very least, we'll be engaging with FDA to get agreement on our next steps for how we take this program forward. But as I talked about, one of the next steps, I think, is to develop an endpoint that is sensitive to the improvements in vision that are being characterized by the patients. So it takes a coalition of stakeholders. We're very aware of that. It's very humbling to present here amongst scientists and physicians that have devoted their career to studying some of the diseases that we're treating. So it's always very gratifying to collaborate with clinicians, scientists, but importantly, the patients that have to deal with the burden of the diseases we're talking about. We know there's nothing that would make us feel better as a company than to develop a treatment that can help patients hopefully obtain certainly a better quality of life and hopefully better vision. Thank you.